The 1920s was an era of prosperity, mass consumerism, and the start of the financial market and the age of jazz. However, it was also the start of an era of extreme wealth and a class divide. But a question still lingers. What was it like to be wealthy? So, dear listeners, welcome to Literary Deep Dive, where we dive into the context and themes of each and every novel and play that we tackle. I'm Alex, and for today's episode, we will discuss a novel that some people consider as one of the greatest American novels, The Great Gatsby. We will be uncovering the deep meaning of high society, understanding the social structure, and to understand the theme that we are focusing on, the hollowness of the upper class. But to understand the environment and the world that revolves around The Great Gatsby, let's understand the era and the author himself, F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, dear listeners, sit back and relax as we now dive into the world of The Great Gatsby. The novel is set in the 1920s, an era of social, economical, and cultural change. After World War I, the American rich started to emerge as a different social class, where two distinct upper-class groups were established, new and old money, in which their wealth came from the exploitation of Western society, the nation's industrialization boom, and ultimately the newly skyrocketing stock market of Wall Street. And at that moment, dear listeners, it started a shift towards the idea that really, money gives you happiness. Well, I hope so. During this era, this was the start of an hedonistic impulse that formed the new social identity of higher society. From cocktail parties, where men and women attend to flirt, dance to the emerging jazz scene and gossip, to mass consumerism brought by the rise of the mass production models by Henry Ford. This created a force that ultimately created a focus on getting rich and reach the American dream. With wealth, it also created a luxurious and vulgar taste towards the lower class. From buying luxurious cars to owning big mansions, it created a statement to the lower class that they couldn't afford to buy the necessities, flaunting their wealth like no tomorrow. But however, the listeners, during the last years of the 1920s, the economy started to crack from the pressure from the constant stock being traded at a rapid pace, and eventually it collapsed, and it was called the Great Depression. It caused an enormous financial meltdown, from businesses closing to workers being laid off. But the wealthy people, they weren't affected, especially old money. But they did, of course, lost their assets like real estate and stocks. But eventually, they still continued life like it was nothing. And that's the reality that happened during this era. And now, dear listeners, after a little bit of the historical facts of the 1920s, let's now talk about the author himself of the book, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald was a man born in a middle-class family in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was a man that felt that he was an outsider among the wealthy societies of the 1900s. His father, Edward Fitzgerald, came from an old but declining financial family. However, dear listeners, his mother, Mary Fitzgerald, came from a wealthy family background in which she was a daughter of the successful Irish business. To listeners, despite their comfortability, there was a distinct divide, as they were not a part of the elite class. Fitzgerald was aware of this gap between his family's social position and the upper class that surrounds them. This made him both admire the rich and, well, resent them at the same time. This started to intensify as he attended Princeton University, where many of the students that attended there came from wealthy backgrounds. He admired their confidence at first, but eventually, he slowly saw the snobbery and sense of entitlement that they possess. Then, Fitzgerald fell in love with a young Chicago debutante named Ginevra King. But in every relationship, it didn't last long, and they eventually ended their relationship. But his memory still remains, and it eventually became the foundation of the character Daisy. And don't worry, dear listeners, we will talk about Daisy later. Then, he left Princeton to pursue military due to the wrenching grades and unrequited love that he felt at that time. But in July 1918, at a country club in Montgomery, Alabama, he met Zelda. She was a charming woman, but also came from a prominent family from the South. She was used to the comfortable lifestyle that comes with being in a wealthy family, from the money to the comfort, and even you can get anything that you want. Oh, I wish I had that life. And at that moment, Fitzgerald was in love. Then, after his discharge in 1919, he proposed to Zelda. However, she was reluctant to marry him, as he didn't come from a wealthy family, and there was no guarantee he'll ever be famous. This reinforces his perspective that wealth is necessary for love and acceptance into society. After the success of This Side of Paradise, Fitzgerald's first novels, dear listeners, Fitzgerald and Zelda became instant celebrities. The extravagant parties that he wished he went to, he attended. He traveled far and wide and lived a lavish lifestyle. But despite this fame, their marriage started to be troubling, as financial troubles, alcoholism, and emotional instability became a factor in their lives. And well, eventually, they started a rift in their relationship. Living among the wealthy communities of Long Island, Fitzgerald observed the carelessness of the upper class. These experiences inspired The Great Gatsby, where he portrayed the rich as people with immense privilege and wealth. But in reality, they have little genuine purpose, responsibility, and even emotional fulfillment. He saw how wealth and status he had once desired disappeared, believing that wealth brings him happiness and acceptance. But in reality, he questioned if wealth actually brings happiness or acceptance in life. And that's the question that we'll be answering today. As we now understand how the era and Fitzgerald's experience intertwine with the theme of the hollowness of the upper class in The Great Gatsby, let's now dive into the idea of how Fitzgerald showed these themes in the novel. Well, dear listeners, beyond the wealthy facade presented by the characters in The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald reveals a sense of emptiness among the upper class. Although they possess enormous wealth and social status, their lives lack genuine purpose, morality, and even emotional fulfillment. Through the characters Gatsby, Daisy, Tom, and Jordan, Fitzgerald demonstrates that wealth often leads to superficiality, selfishness, and lack of meaningful human connection, which leads to the reality that money doesn't make you truly feel the fulfillment or success. Or money doesn't make you happy, because money is just there, the thing that you can get anytime, but the emotion that the individual feels will never. And so, the listeners, let's now dive into the world of The Great Gatsby and understand how through these four characters Fitzgerald demonstrates this type of theme. First, let's start with the man himself, J. Gatsby. Gatsby is an ideal person of success, being able to reach the American dream at a young age and the less amount of time, living the dream that many desires. This dream is achieved through his extravagant parties, lavish mansions, and his wealth, of course. However, his life isn't built out of money, but he strives to achieve his ultimate goal, which is Daisy. Wealth wasn't the main goal of Gatsby, but he uses his wealth as a stepping stone to reach his true goal. From the mansion across the bay from hers to the extravagant parties just to get her attention. His identity is built up around the dream that he will get Daisy. But his desire for Daisy isn't for love, but to send the statement that he is great, in which in chapter 7 he described her as the king's daughter and the golden girl. By having the golden girl, he proves that he is great among all men. But despite the dream, the reality is he wouldn't be able to truly achieve it in the end. Despite the parties that hundreds of people attend to, He felt so lonely, as his only purpose for those parties was to attract the one person that he desires the most. But in reality, it will never succeed. Fitzgerald illustrated this idea in chapter 9, where after his death, no one came from the parties, but only one attended his funeral, which highlights the reality that Gatsby wasn't that great. Fitzgerald uses Gatsby as a way to highlight the belief that money buys things or the luxury that you desires. But in reality, it doesn't build the real feeling of love, fulfillment, and friendship. And to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, and dear listeners, the reality is that wealth doesn't give you the desire that you aspire. Yes, it gives you luxury and money, but in reality, Fitzgerald believes that money doesn't give you true emotion, true fulfillment, and true love. Then we have Daisy, a girl that everybody wants and desires. But despite this, Daisy is an epitome of shallowness, as in her life, she relied on someone to fix her problems or make her decisions. For instance, in chapter 7, when she faced a dilemma to say to Tom that she doesn't love him, when an opportunity presented itself, she took it, because she cannot sacrifice her social position for Gatsby. And of course, eventually didn't follow through with the plan. This shows that Daisy sees the relationship as just a fling and not that serious. She even stated that been everywhere and seen everywhere and done everything, and stated sophisticated. God, I'm sophisticated. Fitzgerald illustrates that Daisy's hollowness came from her passive nature, where she relies on individuals to make her difficult decisions to return back to the place of comfort and safety. And again in chapter 7, Gatsby even stated that her voice is full of money. This is significant as Daisy isn't associated with wealth, but associated as the ideal woman that every single individual wanted. Fitzgerald in this chapter shows that despite Gatsby's perspective of Daisy having genuine beauty, but in reality, she lacks emotional depth to understand the feeling of love and happiness. That even after Myrtle's death, despite Gatsby defending her, she just abandoned him. Even when he died, she didn't even send a flower to his funeral. This illustrates that the lack of emotional emptiness that she has is due to the fact that she only focuses on the desire in her life, and her life is within the club. And that's why, dear listeners, she was the epitome of shallowness, because she relied on her life, relied on other people, and doesn't have any emotional depth, because her money, her wealth, can fix any problem. Anyone that associates with her can fix that problem. And you don't need emotions. You don't need love. Because in a club, you can find love. You can find status. Then we have Tom Buchanan, the man that came from inherited wealth rather than working for it, which actually contrasts with Nick and Gatsby, who earned their fortune. Tom is characterized by Fitzgerald as aggressive, powerful, entitled because of his wealth. His wealth convinced him that his superiority to others exempt them from the moral standards. This is seen in chapter 2, where he slapped Myrtle when she taunted him with Daisy's name. This shows that Tom is careless and he disregards people around him due to his idea that he is superior. From his affairs, racism, violence, and even manipulation, it reveals that his privilege corrupts his mind, in which he viewed people as possession and not actual human beings, and seeing them as objects of entertainment and tools. Fitzgerald shows that Tom's hollowness stems from his lack of ambition or motivation in his life, because he has everything from money, the status, and even the girl of his dreams, or the girl of many people's dreams. He drifts through life by seeking pleasure of power, like having an affair with Myrtle, and assert his dominance over others. Fitzgerald uses Tom to illustrate that behind a polished face and image hides a brutal reality of moral and ethics, where he didn't focus on, because the mere fact is, Tom is a representation of how superiority corrupts a person, corrupts an individual because they believe that they are superior. They are superior above all because they have money, they have status, and they have power. Then we have Jordan. Fitzgerald uses Jordan as a representation of women during the era, where she appears as independent and successful. But slowly, Fitzgerald reveals that her sophisticated life is largely superficial. In Chapter 3, it was revealed that Jordan cheated her way to win a title, highlighting the fact that she doesn't care about moral integrity, but she just only cares about her own image. This stems also to Jordan's relationship, where it's also equally shallow, where she avoids emotional commitment and views through the lens of self-interest. And the fact is, dear listeners, Jordan only focuses on her life, on her destiny, on her self-interest, rather than the people around her, because she doesn't care, because all she cares is her image and her reputation. Because of Jordan's focus on success, reputation, and convenience, it's revealed that her character and identity is dishonest because she focused on her identity, her reputation, rather than the people around her. Because Fitzgerald uses her character to show how wealthy upper class often bends the truth whenever it benefits them, and just faces few consequences. Also, Jordan's emotional detachment further empathizes this theme, because despite her popularity and success, she just forms little to no genuine connection with other people, but the people who are in the club. As we now understand how those four characters connects to the theme, let's now answer the question: why? Why did Fitzgerald use those first characters to highlight the theme? Now, ladies and gentlemen, Fitzgerald uses those characters as criticism of the upper society. Why? Because they are different representation of how hollow the upper class is, from Gatsby's unfulfilled dream, Daisy's superficiality, Tom's carelessness, to Jordan's dishonesty. Fitzgerald reveals that wealth doesn't provide genuine happiness, morality, or meaningful human connections. Although these characters live in a world filled with luxury, privilege, and social prestige, they are emotionally dissatisfied and morally flawed and unable to form authentic relationships. From Gatsby spending his life chasing an illusion, Daisy retreats into wealth rather than face responsibility, Tom uses his privilege to avoid consequences, to Jordan values image over integrity. With those four characters, it demonstrated Fitzgerald's central idea that beneath those glittering facades of the jazz age lies a hollow society where wealth, money, prestige has replaced genuine value and genuine emotion. And that's it for today's episode, dear listeners. Thank you for tuning in for today's podcast. We hope you learned something today about The Great Gatsby and the theme of the hollowness of the upper class. And this is Alex. See you in the next episode or literary deep dive, where we dive into the world of literature and understand the author's perspective of society and the world itself. Now signing off.